early in your career, yeah, say yes to everything. Later on, as you progress, you need to start saying no to more and more things. For sure, you say no to the bad things, but even good things, because just at a certain point, there is not enough time. There's literally structurally not enough time for you to do it. And so you have to be a little bit merciless. It can be painful to say no to a good thing that you want to do. But unless you want to drive yourself crazy and under deliver on everything, you need to. Otherwise, you'll be pulled too thin.
The goal of the Best You podcast is to allow you to feel confident about what you need to do, why you need to do it, and how to do it in order to get closer and closer to your best you. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. I have been looking forward to this interview for, I feel like, almost about a year now. I'm really excited today to be joined by the one and only Dorie Clark. Dorie, I just want to start off by saying thanks so much for spending the time with me today.
Nick, thank you for having me, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, so to give you a little backstory, I think it was about a year ago that I flew out to Salt Lake City because Scott Miller is one of my mentors, and I spent the weekend with him. And he always loves to give me book recommendations, but I always know when book recommendations are ones that I definitely need to read versus ones that I can maybe get to at some point based off of his level of energy behind the recommendation. And when I was there in Salt Lake City and he gave me a copy of The Long Game, I was like, I'm in. And so I remember reading it towards the end of last year, The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And I was telling people that I was training this morning about how excited I was to interview you. And so I'm really excited to really get in that today. It's such an important topic for all of us to know how to apply into our own lives. But to give everybody some kind of quick overview on you and your kind of career journey. You first thought you wanted to be in academia way back when, and you applied for a doctoral program, but then you didn't get in and didn't get into any of the programs, and so you didn't really have a plan B. But then you were like, okay, I'm going to become a journalist, and then you were a professional journalist for about a year or so. But then you got laid off the day before 9/11, is what I understand, the day September 10th, 2001, and so it couldn't really find another job in journalism. So you got into politics, and you were a part of a spokesperson in governors and presidential races, which is awesome. But the governors and presidential races, you guys didn't win. And then you started running a nonprofit. And then you started your own business in 2006. And so the whole idea I'm trying to get at is your career was all over the place and kind of the different things the different endeavors that you took part in. And your book is called How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. So what do you say to somebody who kind of wants to think long-term, but they're like, I know my career is just going to be all over the place, or even if I ever do plan it, it's never going to turn out the way that I plan it out to be. What do you say to that person to be like, yeah, well, maybe we still need to think long-term though?
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And that's a great recap. You have the whole arc there. I think honestly, when it comes to long-term thinking, part of what makes it so important is the fact that the short term can be so crazy and so up and down, right? I mean, it's true. I feel like my experience was possibly a little extreme, but I'm not that much of an anomaly, because these days most people do have multiple jobs or multiple careers before they settle on what they're going to be doing. And certainly, even if somebody settles on something, that doesn't mean they're not going to change their minds later on or want to or need to make career alterations. The crucial thing is not the up and down of the moment, but it's about the long-term intention. I mean, the thing I love about long-term thinking and strategic planning is you can have a 20-year goal and it does not matter. It literally matters not a whit if you do not know how to reach that goal. That is fine, because it would almost be presumptuous to say, oh, I've mapped out my life for 20 years and I literally know today exactly how I'm going to get there. It's like, oh, really? Did you predict a pandemic? I mean, come on,
Yeah.
we can't do it. All we can have is sort of broad brushstrokes and intentionality. And I think having that is important, because it's really like the stock market. If you are an investor and you put your money in, and you put it in today and then tomorrow the market goes down, you're going to freak out if you're taking a short-term position. You're like, "Oh, I lost $1,000 already. This is a terrible investment." But the truth is, if you're thinking, "All right, is it highly likely that over 20 years, if I just leave it alone, that you will have more money at the end than you do today?" The answer is almost certainly yes. And similarly with our careers, if we have the long-term vision of, you know what, I'd like to have a career where I am working with entrepreneurs, or I'd like to have a career where I'm helping kids, or, like whatever your North Star is, if you hold that, even if there's ups and downs, even if there's layoffs, even if, AI eats like half the jobs and you have to reconfigure, you will figure it out because you are being directionally correct in where you're going.
Yeah, no, I think that's so critical from an emotional standpoint too. Like you said, it's like if one of the biggest reasons why long term thinking is key is because the short term is so unpredictable. And I think that so much time people focus so much on the ups and the downs of today that they lose perspective that the down of today is probably not that big a deal. It's gonna be a blip when they go back for in a couple of years and take a look at it from a 5,000 foot view.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, what I like to say is that you don't need to know all the steps along the way. You really just need to know two things, which is what is the vision of the end goal and what is the thing you're going to do next. And that literally is enough to carry you to your 20-year goal.
Okay. I love it. So well, let's just go right into that then. If somebody is like, okay, I need to know two things. I need to know my vision for the long term goal, and I need to know the next things. What are some of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves, or some things that we need to be doing to explore what the long term vision for maybe our career or just generally our lives should be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, some people already have a sense of it. They're like, yes, I know I want to do X, I want to do Y, and if you already have the vision, fantastic. Let's start accomplishing it. But there's plenty of people who maybe just aren't sure. And so for them, I think that oftentimes we also get hung up a little bit on, oh, I have to have the perfect plan. I have to have it, totally figured out. And I think something to remember, we we can change our minds along the way. That is totally okay. And also it's fine to just think of it as a provisional plan. This is my plan until something I like better comes along. That is literally okay. A wise person changes their mind when new facts arise. You
Mm.
don't have to cling to the same vision if circumstances are different. You might have a very different goal for yourself, when you're single, let's say, as compared to if you have kids and get married or something like that. Your idea of what a great life looks like 20 years down the road might change fairly significantly. And that's okay. And that's actually appropriate. But some questions that we can start asking ourselves to begin to figure it out. One of my favorites is actually, who are you jealous of? I mean,
Yeah.
you could start with like, who do you admire? That's nice. But I think sometimes something that's even more salient is, who is it that you look at and you're like, oh my God, how did he get that? How did he get to do that? Because it's sparking something in you. I mean, it might manifest in a way that's not great. Who knows? But it's because something's resonating. It's like, oh, I wish I could have the freedom or the autonomy that he seems to. Or, wow, I love the idea of being able to live in that beautiful place, or, whatever the thing is. But if you peel it back and you really try to understand, all right, what's making me react this way? Like, what are the things that I wish my life looked like? That can actually be a really useful trail of breadcrumbs. Another one that I think is useful sometimes is to ask yourself what you used to like to do as a kid. Because
Mm.
oftentimes, the things that we chose to do when we had total choice, we didn't have a lot of obligations. We were doing it because it was fun, because it was interesting. Those things often have clear adult analogies. Some people really like to build things or to make things. Some people, like me, like I used to really like to write stories. And a lot of times there's continuity in terms of where your inherent interests lie, that you can,
Mm.
follow the strand. I don't know, do you have a
Yeah.
20-year plan, Nick? How do you think about this for yourself?
I do have an idea of kind of where I want to be in 20 years. I do. Do I know the steps along the way? Absolutely not. But I've luckily I've had enough helpful people around me to get me to think that long term on a frequent basis to where I have. But the thing that I need to continue to make sure I don't do is don't convince myself that I can't do it just because I don't know the plan. Or I don't have the expertise now, realizing that there is so much time between now and then, and that time is just opportunity to be able to grow into the person that is able to live into that longer term 20-year vision. But I really thought those questions were awesome, and you said that a wise person changes their mind when new facts arise, and I think that in order to get closer to the best version of yourself, it is really important to have both skills of like discipline and focus, and no matter what, you're going to get the thing done that you said you were going to get done, but also you need to have this malleability, and you need to be able to tweak when new facts arise. And so one of the things that I've pondered on is what is the criteria for a new fact have to be that should be okayed to switch the goal? I don't know if that makes exact sense, but it's like if you're trying to be a person of discipline and you have a goal, but then new facts arise and you're like, wait, does that mean that I should change goals, or is that just something else? How do you know whether or not that new fact is something that should change your goal or not?
Right. So I think we have to think about what type of fact it is, right? And whether
Yeah,
whether
I
it
know it was
impacts
very non-contextual of a question, but
all good, right? We'll parse it. Um, I think also a big question is, does it impact whether you want to do the goal, or does it impact
mm,
how you would accomplish the goal? And those are
yeah,
two sort of important things. So, for instance, I mean, something that I experienced myself. So, as you were mentioning at the beginning of our interview, Nick, my original career goal for myself was to be a professor. I wanted to be in academia, and then my my facts on the ground is that I applied to three different doctoral programs and I got turned down by all of them. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, I guess that's not going to happen. But the truth was, at the time it felt like a kind of final answer, like, oh, that's not going to happen. But it actually wasn't. I mean, first of all, it didn't necessarily impact my core desire about why I wanted to be in academia. It was just like, oh, okay, well, the powers that be are not making this happen. But what I later discovered is, even though there's sort of an established path to a career in academia, that is not the only path. And
mm,
so, I mean, sort of stunningly, because it probably would have taken me, I was looking at fields in the humanities, and it often takes 7 or 8 years to get a doctorate in those fields. But within 3 years of being rejected for the doctoral programs, I was actually teaching college courses at Tufts University, which is, pretty prestigious school, without a doctorate because I had kind of found a side door in, because most universities have a sort of, professor of the practice sort of situation where
mm,
a reasonably qualified professional can teach a course about their area of expertise. And so I was able to start doing that. And, today I teach at Duke, I teach at Columbia, so I've gotten to work with some wonderful schools, still never having a doctorate because I've built up expertise that, at least theoretically, people are interested in. And I'm able to share that with students there. So that's pretty cool. So that was something that, it was a fact that I had to take into account, but it just meant, all right, I have to change the tactic to get to the goal that I wanted. Now, I think something that's very relevant is, does the fact has something fundamental changed that would make you not want to do the thing? And so, an example might be that, let's say you came up and your whole life everybody told you you should be a lawyer. Oh, you're so well spoken. Oh, you're great at arguing. Oh, you're a good writer. You should be a lawyer. That's what people like to tell the literary types, right? So everybody gets fed this idea about, oh, you should be a lawyer. And so you might be thinking this all along, but let's say you do an internship at a law firm and you're like looking around at what these people actually do all day and you're like, wow, this is boring. This is not what I want my life to look like. And in fact, you look at the people who are the most successful lawyers, and again, a very useful question to ask yourself is, would I want their life? You look at the people that are like the paragons, right? The partners, the people where
Mhm.
it's like, oh, everyone's aspiring to get to that. And you say, wow, if I actually could achieve that, would I want that? And if you look at that and you say, absolutely not. No, I don't want to work those hours. No, I don't want to have to be, working by myself all day, locked in, looking at these legal tomes, then that is new information that you did not have access to before because you weren't, up close with lawyers. And so it would be perfectly appropriate to change your goals at that point.
Yeah. No, I think those were a couple of awesome points brought up, and they were, principally based that so many people could apply it to whatever their fact is that arises in their life and see it through that lens. Like you said, does it change whether or not you want to, or does it just affect the how? And some of the examples or some of the things that I was thinking about, if it affects your want to because it's just a little bit harder than maybe you thought, like maybe you still should, but if it's a lot harder and it's going to take 5 more years and maybe you're just really honestly not willing to sacrifice those 5 years, then maybe not. But it's really important to dissect the fact of the new information that comes into your life and really assess it kind of through that lens. I thought that was really key because I think sometimes people will have the new facts come in and they think from a short-term perspective, I'm not going to be happy in the short term because of this fact, and so I'm not going to continue on this goal. I'm going to do something else. But it's like, oh, come on, overcome that short-term dissatisfaction for the long-term satisfaction of really wanting whatever that goal was. But anyways, I thought that was awesome. Kind of along this thought process of long-term thinking. One of the things that I love so much about your book, or one of the quotes, was something about how patience becoming your competitive advantage. And that's something that I have really tried to adopt and really tried to be like, to feel like patience is one of my competitive advantages. And I've interviewed a guy named Jimmy Allen, who's a country singer, and he kind of felt the same way. He obviously didn't use that phrase, but he felt like he was going to stick it out no matter what, longer than anybody else was, and everybody else was going to quit before he would. And so patience was his competitive advantage. But one of the reasons why patience is so hard is because you're not seeing outcomes come from your actions quickly. And unfortunately, there's just a gap. There's results and actions are not always closely related in time and space. There's this gap. And so what have you found for yourself and for other people that allows them to continue to take action even when there's no guaranteed outcome on the other end of it?
Yeah, this is the crucial question, Nick. So I'm glad you're asking it because, yeah, I mean, the truth is, I mean, people are pretty rational. And so even if something was hard, if they felt like there was a guaranteed result, like people would, most people, not everybody, but most people would probably do it. They'd be like, all right, well, I know for sure it's going to pay off. But the
Mm-hmm.
problem here is we can, be kind of certain, pretty certain, but mostly there are not guarantees in life. And so for a lot of people, they are absolutely not willing to make that trade-off, where you're investing a lot and you might not get it at the end. But for the people, the interesting thing, I mean, the metaphor that I like to use is, if you're starting the marathon, there's this horde of people, right? But there's not the same horde of people that finish the marathon. A lot of people drop out along the way. It's a lot less crowded at the end. We think there is so much competition, but it actually gets easier rather than harder as you progress in the journey because there are fewer people who are attempting to do what you're doing. And in my previous book, Entrepreneurial You, I profiled a guy named Jordan Harbinger, who's a fellow podcaster. And today he has a very successful podcast, kind of top rated one. But a big part of his success is that he has, I mean, it's kind of stunning because podcasting is a young art, but he has been podcasting consecutively for 15 years. Like he has really put in a lot
Wow.
of time with this. And there's so many people along the way that start a podcast. There's a study that was done where the average podcast, people record 12 episodes and then they quit. Like that's the average. And
Yep.
so to actually just have the longevity of being like the guy who's willing to do it for 15 years, yes, you have to be good, but also there is not a lot of competition because most people really have not done that and are not willing to do that. So, anyway, to answer your actual question, how do you prepare yourself to weather those difficult times? Honestly, part of it um, is I believe proper scoping. And what I mean by this is that a lot of people fail to do basic research beforehand to try to actually understand based on other people's past experience what they can expect in terms of how
Mm,
thing will take. We kind of think we know or we make these guesses, but we have not actually systematically looked like, okay, I want to have a top podcast, or oh, I want to get promoted to senior vice president or whatever it is. Well, all right, this is not something that is like unique in the universe. People have done this before. And so we actually do have some data. So if you look around and you see, oh, okay, well at my company, most people to get SVP, they have to have been here between, 8 and 12 years. Like that's when they reach it, let's say. Okay, that's really helpful data because, if you're expecting to get that within 4 years, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying, wow, that would be an extremely unusual circumstance. So you better either really over deliver something insane or recognize that if you're feeling angry and dissatisfied by year 4, if you haven't made SVP, you might have had irrational expectations. And if we go into it instead saying, you know what, this is probably about a decade long project, you're not going to be predisposed to quit at year 4 or year 7 or year 9, because you'll understand, you know what, I'm just getting to the good stuff now. If I
mhm.
hang on a little longer, it's likely to happen.
I think that's so critical. Not doing the proper scoping, not doing the basic research on the front end, because I do feel like a lot of people, we set goals without clear insight as to what all it's going to take from a time perspective, from a sacrifice perspective, from a education perspective. We don't know how long what it's going to take to be able to get to that goal, and then when we actually are acting upon it, we're like, oh man. And then people are impatient. And one of the things that I love are 4 questions that you have in your book. I think it's kind of along these same lines of coming up with when you're coming up with a goal, like asking yourself, what's the total cost of the total commitment? What's the physical and emotional cost? What's the opportunity cost? How am I going to feel about this in a year? Like, I think those 4 questions really bring up a lot of proper reflection for somebody before potentially setting a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for raising that, Nick. I mean, one of the things that I kept hearing during the conversations that I had while I was researching the long game, and now, a year into it, giving talks about it and speaking with audiences, it's not that people don't want to be long-term thinkers. I mean, there's pretty much
Right.
nobody that's like, "Oh, that's terrible. Who wants to be a long-term thinker?" Like pretty much people are like, "Yeah, that sounds good." The problem is not them buying into the concept. The problem is them actually doing it. The problem is them actually executing on it. And what seems to be the largest factor is that people just get so sucked up into the short term and the day to day, they feel like they don't have an option. They feel like they don't have an out. They just can't see the long term because they're so busy with these like day-to-day crises and minutiae and things like that. And so a big part, like literally probably the first third of the long game is actually talking about how do you clear more white space in your calendar and in your life. Because if you don't have that, it's not like you have to go on some silent retreat for 6 months. I mean, it doesn't take something that extreme, but you need a little bit of margin. And if you don't have it, it becomes extremely difficult, just at a structural level, to be able to have the space you need to do long term thinking.
Yeah. So, what are some of those things that people can do to create some white space? Because there are definitely people who are listening who are like, I'm too busy. There's no way I can set aside any kind of time for long term thinking.
Yeah. So there are some formulations that I have in the long game, some sort of ideas and strategies that I share. And one of my favorite kind of Zen koans to bonder is the idea of getting comfortable saying no to good things.
Mm.
And what I mean by that specifically, I mean, people are people are smart enough to, generally, I guess if somebody's like a crazy pushover, they wouldn't. But in general, people are smart enough to say no to bad things.
Hmm.
We get that. But the problem comes that at a certain point, I mean, when we start our career, the correct answer is to say yes to everything because frankly, you don't have much else on your calendar. It's like, oh, somebody wants to talk with me. Somebody wants to have a coffee. Somebody wants to pick my brain. Yay. Like you feel so special because like somebody wants to talk to you. And that's great. That's great when you're first starting and there's nothing else to do. But 5 years, 10 years, 20 years into your career, oh my goodness, if you keep up that practice, if you do the same thing, you are going to run yourself into the ground because the circumstances have changed. A lot more people know who you are. A lot more people, are sort of looking up to you because of the successes that you've achieved. And it becomes a fool's errand because you could spend all of your time responding to these inbound requests that take you off course as compared to the things that are priorities for you. So you have to adjust. And so it means that, whereas early in your career, yeah, say yes to everything. Later on, as you progress, you need to start saying no to more and more things. For sure, you say no to the bad things, but even good things, because just at a certain point, there is not enough time. There's literally structurally not enough time for you to do it. And so you have to be a little bit merciless. It can be painful to say no to a good thing that you want to do. But unless you want to drive yourself crazy and under deliver on everything, you need to. Otherwise, you'll be pulled too thin.
No, I think that's so critical. And one of the reasons why through that lens, that long term thinking is so important is I feel like it's easier to say no to maybe good things when you know that it's a distraction for the long term goal, but you have to have the long term goal to know it's a distraction. And so I think a lot of people struggle to say no because they don't know where they're going. And so they need to know that the thing they're saying no to actually is a distraction. I think that one of the things that a lot of people are going to be able to relate with you on is how back in, I think it was 2015 when you gave 74 different talks, so about a talk and a half a week throughout that year, and then you kind of rounded out the year during the holiday season where you were pretty sick, you weren't feeling well because you were basically kind of, burnt out from all your travel, from all your work that you've done in 2015. Talk to us about, first off, what your biggest takeaway from that was and how you've lived life differently because of that takeaway.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's true. 2015 was the year that my second book, Stand Out, came out, and I really wanted to over-index on marketing it and giving talks and being out there, and I did. I succeeded in that goal, so that was nice. But also in the process, I just ran myself down because I was traveling all the time. I was barely at home, and it's exhausting. It's disruptive to your routine. It's hard to eat properly. It's hard to exercise when you're traveling that much. It felt like all my time either packing or unpacking or being in a cab or something. And it just wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
satisfying way to live. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that I did, but one immediate one actually was the next year for 2016. I decided I was really going to turn over a new leaf. So I created a goal for myself where my idea I wanted just try to savor a little bit more the place that I was, because I was living in New York and it was very expensive to live in New York, and I was like, why am I paying so much money to be here if I'm not even doing anything or like making use of it? So I came up with an idea that I would do, as I called it, one uniquely New York activity per week. So something that
Mm.
I felt like could only be done in New York, but also if I was traveling. I tried to do this as well. So if I had the week in Seattle, I had to pick a uniquely Seattle activity so that I could, suck the marrow out of my time. So it brought me to start going to Broadway shows. I did like neighborhood tours in New York. I, did these kind of iconic things like, oh, let's visit the Rainbow Room or, something like that. So that was both a fun thing, it was a thing to look forward to. It was a thing to kind of break up monotony. It gave me an excuse to reach out to friends to do something, and a way I think to create a little bit more balance. But it also did end up, as a result of starting to go to these Broadway shows, it led me to a new 10-year goal for myself, which I created in 2016. And the 10-year goal is to write, to learn to write musical theater, which I have now done. I now can write musical theater, which I could not do at the beginning of this. And I had a 10-year goal of wanting to write a show that made it to Broadway. So I'm still hard at work on this goal.
Wow, that's awesome. That's super cool. I think one of the things that you say in your book is like when you do certain things, it can open up opportunities or ideas in different areas as well, which I think is super cool. And I think a lot of people probably listening feel like they're running themselves into the ground. And I think that the principle of setting a goal that requires you, in order to achieve that goal, to either take some time for yourself or just take time away from work. I think that's really important. I recently set a golf goal for myself, a golf performance goal. And I never thought I would be somebody who would be able to spend an extra 5, 6, 7 hours a week out at the golf course / driving range. And I did. And it was because I had this goal that I deemed valuable to play golf, to make it where I didn't overwork myself.
Yeah, that's great. It's a perfect example. So how are you doing? What's your handicap, man?
It's good. So I think my handicap is like 10 right now. But the biggest thing,
Impressive. Good job.
well, I appreciate it. But the biggest thing was I played in a member guest tournament with my dad, and we came in third place out of 60. And so that was one of the biggest, that was kind of like the back end. This is what I'm really working for. So anyways, I'm intrigued now in this 10-year goal that you had for yourself. I think a lot of people, maybe when they would originally come up with the idea of the goal like that, of wanting to be able to write a show that goes on a Broadway, would not do it because they would convince themselves that something like that is not possible. How did you overcome the thought of who would I be doing to create a Broadway show? We'll be back to the interview in just a second. But first, I wanted to share a quick testimonial from a past participant of the 10-week transformation program. I started running the 10WT in the beginning of 2020, and I've had over 150 people and counting go through it, and they've seen amazing results both inside and out. If you're inspired to join after listening to the testimonial, then go to nickcarrier.com to learn more. We'll get back to the episode in just a minute, but first, here's what they had to say.
My name is Ashley Reed. I joined the 10-week program really because I wanted to lose a little bit more weight and gain strength. I accomplished both of those things. I'm definitely stronger, and I've also made some incredible friends in the process, which I didn't expect. You're just silly if you don't do this.
I in a lot of ways, I just think it's kind of a mindset issue. I feel like, I'm an intelligent person, and if I put my mind to something, I can do it. And I feel like that's true for just about anybody. I mean, people always love to have this sort of stupid use case of just because you want to play in the NBA doesn't mean you can play in the NBA. It's like, all right, fine. All right. I understand maybe athletics is a different thing. I'm not going to be 6'7". That is not going to happen. I understand. But for anything that involves, your mind and things that you can learn, people can learn it. So, I've spent my whole life, just whatever, being kind of pathetic at learning French, half learning French and never actually learning French. And, I accept that, some people may pick it up a little faster than me, it's probably not my strong suit, but that doesn't mean I can't do it. If I moved as the front of my priority list, if I, moved to Paris for 6 months or a year or something, I guarantee you I could speak French, just because you're not the fastest or you're not, you don't take to it as quickly as somebody else. I mean, that's surely true for almost all things in a world of 7 billion people, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. course you can do it. Of course I could write, a Broadway show. Of course I could, whatever, write a science fiction novel, or I could, learn to fly an airplane or whatever. It just depends if I want to spend my time doing it. But if you are a reasonably intelligent person who is willing to be persistent, of course you can do these things.
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen to that. Before I get into the wrap up, I want to ask kind of one more question on this, because I think a lot of people come up with dreams or goals of things that they could do, but then you also need to ask yourself whether it's worth it or not. And so how did you decide that a 10-year goal takes a lot of time, energy, and effort over that period of time? How did you kind of decide that this was something that was worth it? It was worth spending the time to learn how to write the music, and then it was going to be worth the time to actually write the show itself? Was it just kind of, you knew you would really enjoy it? You knew that it would be a valuable experience? You knew you could make money from it? Like, what were the different things that you thought about that made it like, this is definitely worth it, I'm going to do it?
This is an answer that, probably is going to be different for everybody. But in my particular case, it was the nature of how it came to me, because I literally woke up one morning. It was the night after I saw a show on Broadway with a friend, and I really loved it. It was a fantastic show. It was Fun Home, which won the Tony in 2016. And I woke up the next morning, and I just was sort of beset with this feeling, this like very strong feeling that I need to learn to write musical theater. And it was very anomalous because I had previously had no interest in writing musical theater. This is not anything that I would have really considered. And so, because it was so anomalous, I felt compelled to listen to it. And I just really felt like, all right, well, I guess this is kind of a message from the universe. And I am trying to be thoughtful and listen to that and be open to that. And so, all right, if the universe is telling me to do it, then I guess I should do it. And so that has just marched me forward. I'm like, all right, well, apparently this is the thing. This is the plan. And I think, for some people, you experience that at different times. I mean, it's not like I experience it all the time, but a few times in my life I have. And those are sort of strong senses or intuitions that I feel like are worth listening to. But, so if you have one of those, I think that's great. If you don't, I mean, you can certainly just subject it to rational inquiry. And that, at a really basic level is like, all right, so do I feel comfortable? Like, I mean, here's the thing, right? If I write a show that is successful on Broadway, yeah, it'll probably make some good money. But also, I mean, is the show going to get to Broadway? Could it get to Broadway and then, be a flop? I mean, yeah, all those things are highly possible. It's certainly not a guaranteed moneymaker at the end of this, but am I willing to do it anyway? Would I find the process valuable? Would it be interesting enough? Is it worth it to try? Again, I think the crucial thing is the result is not guaranteed. If it were, it's a different equation. But if, the question is, would it still be worth it to you to try, even if it doesn't work? And if you can answer in the affirmative, then that's probably worth doing.
Yeah, I think that's so key. We don't want to set goals just solely based off of the outcome. We want to set goals based off of the people that we're going to become through the process of chasing down that goal. And then also like the people you're going to meet. And there's so many different things that make a goal so valuable to you outside of just the outcome and the result. And so I think that realizing that and asking yourself the question of is it worth it outside of the outcome and the result, I think that's super key. But before I ask the last question here, Dorie, I just want to acknowledge you for staying kind of persistent throughout your career, even though it was all over the place. And, it's really cool looking back at it now that you are kind of doing the things that you originally said you wanted to do, but you didn't follow the path that you thought you were going to follow. And so I think that's a huge lesson and thing for people to always remember is maybe you have this goal and you're not on the path that you thought you would be on en route to it, but you actually might be on the exact path that you're supposed to be on. So remember that. So I want to acknowledge you for working through that. And I just think that the long game is a masterpiece, and I know that it's affected so many people's lives, and I know it will continue to do so. And I know that so many people listening today are want to go grab a copy of it. So y'all make sure you go grab The Long Game: How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World. And also make sure you go follow her on Instagram if you don't already, at Dorie Clark, and you can go visit DorieClark.com. Is there any other good place where people should go learn more about you and support you?
Oh, thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Well, you've mentioned some good ones. I'll just add in that if folks are interested in strategic thinking, I have a free strategic thinking self-assessment, and folks can get it for free at DorieClark.com/the long game.
What? Give us just one tidbit on that. What is the benefit of the strategic thinking self-assessment?
Well, I think oftentimes, again, people like the idea conceptually of strategic thinking, long-term thinking, but one piece, as we talked about, is like, I'm too busy. But if we get past that, if they're like, all right, I'm going to give it a try, the next problem that people run into is like, how do I get started? Like, what should I even be asking here? Like, how do I kind of get into that mindset? And so it's a detailed series of questions that are basically prompts to help you get in that mental space and sort of, do a better job tapping into your aspirations and help you come up with the sort of basis for your long-term vision. So it's really just kind of a roadmap to try to make it a little easier for people to ideate in that way.
Yeah, I love it. I know that'll be valuable for a lot of people out there. So make sure you go check that out as well. We'll have all that stuff in the show notes. But last question here, Dorie, is that I think that getting closer to the best version of yourself is a constant journey and a unique journey. I don't think that we ever actually get to that best version of ourselves. And I also think that the way that I get there is going to be a little bit different from the way that you get there. So the last question is for you personally. If there are 3 things that you could currently do or currently work on to get closer to the best version of Dorie Clark that you could possibly be, then what are those 3 things that you could currently do or currently work on?
Nice. All right, we're coming up with the action list here. So
Let's go.
yeah. So in terms of my self improvement regimen, certainly one thing that I am trying to do more consistently is my exercise routines and being good about that. I would say on average I'm probably like maybe 3 times a week, but I'm trying to see if I can get it up to almost every day. I think 7 days a week is probably over ambitious, but if I can get it up to like 5 or 6, I feel like that would be pretty on point. So I'm working on that goal. I would say another one that I think is important is continuing to improve and being better about proactively reaching out to friends. I have some friends that, I don't necessarily mean the people you see all the time, but I mean maybe sort of the next tier out. I have some friends that are just so good about periodically like sending a text message, be like, hey, just checking in, how you doing? And I feel like that's so nice. And I'm often too busy, I say in air quotes, to think to do that. But it's very thoughtful when you receive those messages. And so I want to be a little bit more like that. I think that that's something worth striving for. And then, another thing about just kind of leveling up is, again, we were talking about this with a white space, and these things are always a journey, right? Because again, the policies that you put in place now, they're not going to hold you the rest of your life because you are getting more successful and more people want things. So you have to kind of tweak them and make it a little bit tighter. And so I think continuing to refine my calendaring essentially so that I'm protecting enough white space so that I am able to do the content creation that kind of the baseline of what I do and enables me to reach more people at scale. I think that's actually one of the most valuable things I can be doing. So I'm continuing to tweak the algorithms there.
That's awesome. Those are 3 great things. Those are so key, and I relate with a lot of them as well. And I know that so many people got a ton of value here today. So again, y'all make sure you go grab the long game, and you also make sure, I know I'm going to go do this later as well. Take the strategic thinking self-assessment at DorieClark.com. I know that will help so many of you guys, along with what Dorie has talked about here today. That will help you to, once you set aside the white space, to sit down and think about this, to actually have a method through which to think about it. So make sure you go check that out as well. But Dorie, that's all we got today. Thanks so much for the time. It was great.
Thank you, Nick. Great talking with you.